Breaking Bad is a critically acclaimed drama TV series that aired from 2008 to 2013 with Vince Gilligan as showrunner. The show is set in New Mexico and it follows a man stricken with cancer and facing mortality. The meek but brilliant high school chemistry teacher Walter White rapidly transformed himself into a ruthless methamphetamine kingpin, ostensibly for the sake of his family's financial well-being after his own impending demise, but really it turns out for the sheer thrill of it. Mastery becomes an addictive end in itself. The drive to secure the well-being of others becomes a pretense for the drive to produce a legacy for oneself and thus to triumph over one's own finitude. Along the way, Walter White gives himself the nickname Heisenberg. In this critical commentary of the TV show, I'll explore how meaning is created for the audience through the mise-en-scène during a phone call scene in the third-to-last episode of the show called Ozymandias, which is among the highest-rated episodes in the history of television. My commentary will be focused on the performance delivered by the actors and the narrative and how it has been building up to this moment, but I'll briefly comment on the type of sounds and colors used in the scene, as well as the editing and the hate one of the characters gets because of how the show is structured. In this scene, Walter is finally admitting everything he has done throughout the series on the phone with his wife, Skylar. The scene opens with Walter's family concerned for the safety of Holly, Walter and Skylar's daughter, who Walt kidnaps because of his selfish desires. From the get-go of the scene there is a noticeable dynamic between the clothes Skylar and her sister Marie are wearing. Skylar is wearing all white clothes signifying her purity and innocence, but we can still see her undershirt which is purple, the color her sister usually wears and the one that can be referred to as the color of deception, as Marie is constantly being deceived by her loved ones throughout the series. Marie herself is wearing black-colored clothes, which can be referred to as the color of death, as it is the most commonly worn color on funeral ceremonies, and her husband happens to be killed earlier in that same episode. The use of color here is subtle, and it's not primarily part of the mise-en-scène of the scene compared to the narrative and the performance. After a brief conversation between the two sisters, the phone rings. Skylar reaches for the phone, which is conveniently placed next to a set of knives which she earlier used to defend herself from Walter. This shows the viewers that the phone itself is a weapon that can be used against Walt, just like the knife. Judging by Anna Gunn's performance at the start of the phone call, Skylar appears angry at Walter and demands that Holly is brought back. At first, Walter's voice is more calm and composed, but as soon as he finds out there are police in the house and they are listening on the phone call, he switches the timbre of his voice to a more sinister and angry one. Here Bryan Cranston utilizes what is referred to by Richard Dyer as the radio acting, as Cranston is using his voice to convey emotion without his presence on the screen. The change is immediately noticed by Skylar. The camera switches from her side profile to her frontal profile and slowly zooms in on her face, diverting the audience's entire attention to Anna Gunn's facial expressions, reacting to Walter's voice. She realizes that this is an act of kindness to her by Walter by making her appear as the victim and not as an accomplice in his drug empire. This is all noticeable in Anna Gunn's confused and sad expression on her face and the tears forming in her eyes as she realizes that Walter is finally doing something to protect them. This act of kindness, in a way, is the best thing Walter has done for his family because everything else he had done throughout the series has brought pain and suffering to his family, and in particular to Skylar, who does not deserve to be punished because of the selfishness of her husband. Anna Gunn's character goes through a lot of hardships throughout the series and yet is one of the most hated characters by the viewers, evident in numerous internet blog posts and a whole social media group dedicated towards hating Skylar. This is perhaps due to the fact that Walter is the show's protagonist and there is a natural tendency to empathize and root for him despite his moral failings. And the one character who consistently opposes Walter and calls him on his lies, Skylar, is in a sense his antagonist. This effect, however, was never intended by the showrunner, and he states in an article that he thinks the people who have these issues with the wives being too bitchy on the Breaking Bad are misogynists, plain and simple. On another note, it can be argued that this unnecessary hate is the fault of the showrunner and the writers, as there is a lack of emphasis placed by the writers and directors on several instances of abuse throughout the show, which can be partly responsible for contributing towards a culture of misogyny and victim-blaming fostered by fans towards Skyward. Walter later on addresses Hank's whereabouts, and we can see on screen that even he can no longer hold back his tears because he truly cared for his brother-in-law, and he died trying to do the right thing. This scene shows the brilliance in the acting of Bryan Cranston, as he has to act as Walter White, who acts as Heisenberg. The tears are held back by Heisenberg, but they are shed by Walter as he comes to terms with the fact that he has failed his initial task to provide for his family, and he has lost their love forever. When it comes to confrontational scenes between characters, they are usually in very close proxemics, like for example the scene from The Dark Knight where the Joker is confronted by Batman in a very close proximity. In Breaking Bad, however, Skyler and the police confront Walter through the phone, yet the scene remains just as impactful as other scenes of this sort. This is thanks to the editing, which constantly switches the scenery from Skywar's to Walter's, allowing the viewer to seamlessly experience both sides of the scene as if they were in the same location. Additionally, the actors are framed and edited to look off-screen with occasional frames where they are framed looking at each other, which further conveys their almost fully disintegrated relationship while still maintaining a clean shot composition. In terms of sound design, the whole scene has mainly synchronized diegetic sounds in it so that the realness and sadness of the situation can be emphasized. There are a few asynchronous sounds, including the crickets cricketing in the scenery behind Walter, and Skylar's sister faint crying after finding out her husband is no longer among the living. To sum up, the scene is only long approximately 5 minutes, but it serves as the perfect defeat of Heisenberg, which is what the whole second half of the final season of the show has been building up to. Furthermore, it allows the audience to sympathize more with the rest of the White family through the realistic mise-en-scène consisting of well-acted performances and diegetic sounds.